Well, welcome everyone. I'm Catherine Wygant Fawcett, the Executive Director of the Institute for Family Owned Business, AKA CAT for Brooke. We're going to have a fun show coming up where we do chit chat with CAT. So we're the Institute for Family Owned Business. We're a nonprofit that helps family businesses succeed. We have Brooke Stewart here, our Director of Communications, who's joining us. Thank you to KeyBank for being our title sponsor. Thank you to Maine HR Convention and Maine Biz for sponsoring us as well. We've muted everyone and we've recorded this program for later viewing. We'll share the slides after the program and we want to make it as interactive as possible. So, you know, we have a small group. We could all turn our videos on if you like. And then you can send any of your questions and things in the chat feature. Towards the end of the program, we'll be putting a link to a survey in the chat. Please fill this out for us because it helps us build our programs for next year. As many of you know, the IFOB is a nonprofit. It helps family businesses succeed. We've added many online programs this year and we'll be opening up, July 20th for our Wine and Nine. And that's golf for women. So if you want to learn how to golf or if you already golf, we'll help you with that. And then we're going to have a fabulous 9-hole scramble where we let the men in and we're having a full baby back rib barbecue party. It's going to be really fun. So love to have you join us. We work with CEOs, we work with women in family business, we work with the next generation, and we work with leaders in transition. And our next program is Wednesday, July 21st. Hit me with your best shot. Everybody's wondering, what are we doing with vaccinations and all the rest of that? So we'll have legal expert Laura Rideout. She's a partner with Pretty Flaherty, and she'll give us the best practices. And then we'll have Jean Ginn Marvin, the innkeeper at the Nonantum Resort, and she'll be able to give us her practical perspective from the hospitality industry. And she'll be giving us some data from Hospitality Maine as well. So you can register online at fanbusiness.org, or you can message Brooke and the chat, and she'll sign you up. Now, our biggest thing is it's nomination time. You have until Friday to nominate your favorite family business. And if you nominate them, they'll know you recognize their excellence. They don't need to be members of the Institute to be nominated. If they fill out the application, they get 2 free tickets to the awards night and a free membership to the IFOB. So mark your calendars for October 6th as we're going to come out in public and we're going to celebrate and we're going to have a great time, and we'll do it in person and virtually. We'll be live streaming it and we'll have 20 finalists and then 7 winners, and it'll be like the Oscars. And I always say my favorite thing is to make grown men cry, and they do, because it's so moving and emotional, and it's a great night. So please send us your nominations so we can have some fun family businesses to recognize. Today we have Tawny Alvarez with Verrill Law and Chris Hynes, Employer Relations Specialist, York County Department of Vocational Services, Maine Medical Center. I thought I had a big title. That's pretty good, Chris. So here we go. They'll be talking to us about covering and disabilities in the workforce. And I guess I will turn it over now to you, Tawny. So thanks for coming.
Thanks, Catherine. Welcome, everyone. And thank you so much, Catherine, for inviting me. And Chris and I have been working hard and are really looking forward to today's presentation and working together to have this dialogue with everyone. So I like to have an outline to make sure everyone knows kind of what we're going to talk about, so that they walk away not feeling as though I let them down, so that they know where I'm going to go, what I'm going to tell them. And then if they have questions, they know kind of when in the program it might make sense to bring it up. If it's related in any way to anything Chris and I are talking about, though, please, don't hesitate to put something in the chat and let us know. If it's something that we don't understand, we may ask you to unmute and verbalize the question, but let's get going. So covering, we're going to talk about what it is, why it's important, the role it plays in diversity and inclusion programs, and the way in which we can limit its effect on DEI programs. So you're going to learn that covering isn't something that we really want to be happening at our organization. It naturally does, but we're going to talk about ways in which we can limit the adverse effects. But because we are remote everyone knows, or if you've attended any of the programs I've done in the past, I really like interactive discussions and dialogue. So we're going to start out with some interaction, and that's with a poll. And the question that I want to pose to everyone, and we're going to get the question up there, it's which of the following individuals was asked to cover and refused? 1, Helen Keller, 2, Margaret Thatcher, 3, Barack Obama, or 4, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So I'm going to give everyone a couple of minutes to respond. Now, I'm sure there's people who are saying, Tawny, this isn't fair. You have not told us what covering is yet. So how can you expect us to answer a question when you haven't even explained what covering itself is? And it's my goal or hope that, we're going to jump into it right from here, that we're going to talk about these 4 individuals in some detail and their life as it relates to the idea of covering. And from there, we're then going to be able to discuss individuals who have chosen not to cover and potentially why. We'll give it just another minute or so because I see we've only got 3 people. Come on, everyone. This is one we can all do. So we've only got half of you right now who have put an answer down. And I think you're going to be excited. I'd say there's no wrong answer, but there are. So I'm not going to lie to you first thing. So there are wrong answers. But the good news is I don't know who's making the guess. So, throw your thoughts out and we'll go from there. Okay, let's close down the poll, Brooke, and we'll show everyone. So in sharing the results, people see we had kind of a wide mix. We had 25% at Helen Keller, 50% at Margaret Thatcher, 25% at Barack Obama. So the correct answer is Barack Obama. Now, I want to go through each of these individuals. Helen Keller insisted that she be photographed from angles that hid her protruding eye. So as a child, before she had a glass eye, she had a protruding eye, and she always required that she be photographed in a way in which it wasn't shown. Now, this is a form of covering. Margaret Thatcher, she was asked to go to a voice coach, and she did go to a voice coach because her advisors indicated that she sounded like a fishmonger's wife. She had grown up in a working class family, but her advisors felt as though her accent needed to be scrubbed. And there's no evidence that she ever complained about the scrubbing of that accent. As to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he always ensured that if his cabinet entered the room, he was sitting behind a desk so that you couldn't see his wheelchair. And in most pictures, he also attempts to limit the visibility of his wheelchair. Now, Barack Obama is the one individual of these 4 who refused to cover. His advisors, when he was running for Congress, told him that if his goal was to someday run for president, he would never win having 2 weird names. And they said weird names. Barack Obama is not a man who can win the presidency. Instead, you either need to use the name that you used in high school, which was Barry Obama, or you need to change your last name, something like Barack Smith or Barack Jones. But someone with the name Barack Obama would never be able to win the presidency. So I've just given 4 types of covering. So let's talk about what covering is. Covering is an attempt to minimize personality characteristics or attributes based off of societal stigmas. Throughout the course of this presentation, we're going to be focusing extensively on a Deloitte University Leadership Center for Inclusion report entitled Uncovering Talent. And in that report, it was revealed that 61% of employees cover their identity in some way. 61% of employees. I really want that to sink in because This is a phenomenon that doesn't just occur with people who are in the quote unquote majority, right? We're talking about non-disabled, heterosexual, white men who are covering, who otherwise wouldn't appear to fall within any of these classifications. So it's important to understand that this isn't something that only a small segment of our population is doing, but a very, very large majority. Now, this is not necessarily that the employee themselves is purposefully hiding something about themselves. So sometimes people will say, well, it's inappropriate, they shouldn't be hiding, it's almost like they're lying something. That's not what covering is. Instead, what they're doing is they're downplaying an aspect of themselves, whether or not it is an emotional aspect, whether or not it's something that they enjoy, something they identify with, for fear that they're going to draw unwanted attention to themselves and that that's going to make other people feel uncomfortable. You know, we have so many examples of famous covering, and we just went through 3 of them. FDR covered his disability, being in the wheelchair. Margaret Thatcher used the voice coach based off of perceived class issues. Deloitte data shows that 83% of LGBTQ plus individuals cover in some format. 79% of Black employees cover, 67% of women cover in some format, 66% of women in general cover, and 45% of heterosexual white men cover in some format. We're going to get into details as to what that might look like. So why is it important? Why did Catherine and the Institute, why am I here talking about something like this? Well, when over half of your employees are doing something, we need to understand why, right? So we've got 61% of our team is covering in some format. So let's understand what type of covering could be occurring. There's 4 specific types of covering that we're going to jump into and really get into a dialogue about. And that's known as appearance covering, affiliation covering, advocacy covering, and associational covering. Appearance covering is going to be something to the effect of, let's say that you have a male in your organization who is over the age of 60, his hair is graying, but he doesn't want people to know that he's gaining in age and maturity and seniority. So instead he dyes his hair so that he appears younger. That's a form of appearance covering. We have affiliation covering, and that is people who might hide their political affiliation or hide their parental status, being concerned about the motherhood penalty. We have advocacy covering, and that's going to be people who don't discuss or share an aspect of their kind of belief system based off of something like Black Lives Matter or Asian Lives Matter. And then we have associational covering. And those would be situations in which maybe individuals don't join affinity groups that recognize or support something in which they either believe in or identify with. That's going to be a form of associational covering. We hear a lot of times, and especially now when we're talking about the DEI movement, about bringing your whole self to work. This understanding that people are not just a work self and a home self, but that people should be bringing their whole self to work and not having multiple identities depending on the social context, the business context. People will say that they have a book club persona and they have a parent persona at bedtime. But there is very specific harm when someone compartmentalizes these disparate identities. A Kellogg School professor has conducted research that suggests that people are more likely to engage in unethical behavior when they separate their personal and professional lives. In this experiment, the researchers found that if they primed individuals to see their work and home identities as distinct, it led them to harbor more feelings of inauthenticity, such as, I'm unsure of what my real feelings are. And then those inauthentic feelings had consequences regarding whether or not they were going to be honest during the course of a coin toss game. So they used something really silly, a coin toss game. How many times did it hit heads or tails? But based off of that priming, it showed that when you're separating yourself, you're less likely to be truthful. The last thing we want is some people at work who are not being truthful. So let's jump into these different types of covering. And the first type of covering that we want to talk about is appearance-based covering. So what is appearance-based covering? It can relate to race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and we're going to really get into disability during Chris's presentation, military status, socioeconomic background. All of these things are something that can be appearance-based covered. When Deloitte was conducting this research, we heard individuals say things such as, to overcome Asian stereotypes, I do my best to speak up, speak clearly, and carry myself in a confident manner. From a gender perspective, women responded, I wear clothing that makes me appear more masculine. I model male behavior to break down barriers to success. And I go to places that men like to go to be part of that group at work. It may not be something that interests me, but I'm going to go there because I know that to get ahead or to have that time, I'm going to need to do those types of things. I also will downplay my interest in feminine type things. It may be that I really enjoy needlepoint or I really enjoy quilting, but I'm not going to share that in the work environment because I feel as though it is too feminine. For disabled individuals or individuals with a disability, they know I don't use my cane if I can avoid it. So not using these tools that would help them to accomplish job duties or just make them more comfortable, but not using it because they don't want to be identified in that format. As to socioeconomic status, people who grew up very poor don't want people to see or visualize that, and they talk about how they make sure that all of their clothing has visible name brands on it, that they would go to Goodwill or they would go to places to make sure that those name brands were visible so that people didn't believe that they were socioeconomically unable to afford something. So we have 29% of our team members who are indicating that they engage in some type of appearance-based covering. So that's pretty crazy. Almost 1 in 3. So almost 1 in 3 people are saying, I do some form of appearance-based covering. Now, of that 29%, 82% cover based on believed that their appearance-based covering was somewhat to extremely important in their long-term professional advancement. So this isn't something that people are just doing just because. They truly believe that this is necessary for them to do to get ahead in their business environment. So then the question becomes, why? What can we do to help people recognize or understand that covering isn't necessary and being their whole self is important? We're going to get into that later in the presentation, but I'm going to give you a hint now. It starts from the top down. We have to have managers and leaders who are willing to uncover. So if you're sitting here thinking, you know, I cover in this way or that, we're going to have to talk about uncovering and what that looks like. So we talked about appearance-based covering. Let's talk about affiliation covering. So this slide provides some information regarding different forms of affiliation covering. So for gender covering, individuals who are coached to not mention family commitments, so daycare pickups or jumping in at night to do extra work after kids have gone to bed. and just generally kind of concerns about discussing flexible work arrangements. Affiliation covering for people based off of age. So younger people noting that they're hesitant to ask for time off because they don't feel as though they've earned that type of flexibility, or older individuals who are worried that their age is going to block them from promotion. So being concerned to not mention age because they think someone will overlook them for a promotion, thinking that they're too late in their career to take on something like that. Staying away from things that stereotypically may be associated with your race or ethnicity. So we have individuals of an Asian descent who are saying, I don't do any work involving math because of the stereotype that the Asian individuals are good at math. So the Deloitte survey found that 40% of respondents had engaged in some form of affiliation-based covering. So recall that some of our team members may be covering on a multitude of axes, so associational, affiliation, all different ways in which they're covering. But we have 40% who are covering from an affiliation standpoint. Of that 40%, 79% believed that the affiliation-based covering was somewhat to extremely important to their long-term professional advancement. So over 3/4 believed that it was important to advancement. Okay, so we've done appearance-based, we've done affiliation-based. Let's talk about advocacy covering. So advocacy covering is going to include such as citizenship, having a green card and not being a full citizen. I don't speak about anything political because the risk of hearing, if you don't like it, then just leave, is something that's at top of mind. Political affiliation, noting that it's difficult during an election year to not offend anyone who may be a Republican or a Democrat. So downplaying your own beliefs to limit any controversy in that regard. Gender, I try not to make gender an issue and never suggest it's an issue by not bringing up gender bias as a factor when considering applicants, even if it might be present. I've talked at length, and if you've attended previous presentations I've done, about being a third-party bystander and bystander intervention. We've talked a lot during DEI presentations about the importance of being an active bystander and stopping harassment, whether it's sex harassment, race harassment, any form of harassment or discrimination. The problem is that we see a lot of people who don't do it, and they're not doing it based off of advocacy covering. So if you're an individual of color and you see somebody who's being harassed or discriminated based off of their color, you are less likely to step up and to call the other individual out on that because of concerns as to advocacy covering. Similarly with women, that we see women less likely to stand up when inappropriate conduct is happening to somebody who they would identify with based off of advocacy covering. In the Deloitte study, 37% of respondents indicated that they participated in some form of advocacy-based covering. And of that 37%, 75% believed that advocacy-based covering was somewhat to extremely important to their long-term professional advancement. So this is not a small subsection of our employees who are doing this. And as we discuss this, I hope you recognize and understand how adverse it can be to your own harassment policies right now, and why, when you have an issue that comes up and no one's spoken about it, these concepts of advocacy covering could be one of the reasons in which you're not hearing about the issue. So we've done advocacy covering, we've done appearance-based covering. Let's go on and talk about the fourth form of covering, and that is going to be associational covering. So associational covering concerns how individuals will avoid contact with other group members. So people like me, you would stop hanging out with people who have similar identifications to you, such as an employee refusing to participate in an affinity group because they don't want to be specifically identified based off of that characteristic. I've worked with a lot of organizations who have started some form of affinity group, and it dies out based off of lack of participation or lack of membership. In those situations, I have significant concerns that you have a team that is covering from an associational standpoint, that they're refusing to become involved for concerns that they're going to seem to be too involved in the rights or the duties that we have to individuals who fall within these protected classifications. So of the respondents to the Deloitte study, 29% of respondents admitted to some form of associational covering, and 79% of that group stated that they believed that it was somewhat to extremely important to long-term professional advancement. So how do we see this, or how do we see it most often? Women who refuse to or are afraid to sponsor other women because they're afraid to be seen as someone who only sponsors or mentors women. So instead they'll mentor or sponsor a man so that they don't seem as though they're only supporting women. Employees who refuse to bring their +1 to work events because they're being afraid of being labeled as LGBTQ plus individuals, and then also refusing to sponsor or mentor individuals who identify as LGBTQ plus. From a mental and physical health standpoint, and Chris is going to get into this more, and we're going to have more of a dialogue about this, but individuals who suffer from depression, who won't talk about the fact that they do suffer from depression or anxiety, they don't do so publicly. We have individuals who won't associate with cancer support groups because they don't want to draw attention either to their current medical status or disability or their past status. And then one that I think we're seeing a lot more of lately in the pandemic, I think definitely brought it to the forefront, is alcoholism. And not joining other people at work because they are ribbed for not ordering an alcoholic beverage. So we have individuals who have this disability who at work functions then refuse to go out or spend time with others because they're afraid that colleagues or coworkers are going to say, come on, just have one, or don't be a lightweight, you know, all those comments that unfortunately people say when someone is refusing to drink. So what role does it play in diversity and inclusion? We've got the percentages of people that are covering along an axis as somewhat to extremely detrimental to their sense of self. Look at these numbers. I mean, over 50% are saying that this is detrimental to their sense of self. So we know based off of the first statistic I gave you, 61% of our employees are covering in some format. And of that, over 60% are saying that this is detrimental to their health in some format. So here we are as organizations saying, let's get healthy, you know, let's all walk, let's make sure that we're making good choices so that we have happy, healthy individuals, but we're missing it and not identifying or talking about this huge elephant in the room, which is people not bringing their whole self to the office. So what do? We need to work to provide an atmosphere where employees feel safe and comfortable to uncover. In my experience so far, the best way for us to do this is a top-down approach. So we need to educate senior and mid-level managers about what covering is and how it affects employee choices. I suffer from depression and anxiety, and I have been very open and honest with my colleagues and with my team members about that. So when I run into a spell in which I'm having difficulties, in which I need time, I am honest about that. And I think that once I was able to uncover that aspect of my life, it made it a lot easier for me to be honest in my whole self at work. There was, I'm a single mom, and there was a long time that I also covered that and wouldn't talk about the fact that, I had a child that I needed to run home to and take care of, and that there wasn't another person there. Those were all aspects of me covering who I was, and by openly talking about my life and the different aspects helped me bring my whole self to work. And honestly, then didn't have any space in my mind saying, who knows this about me and who doesn't, and who do I have to keep it from, and how are they going to respond if they find out? So to me, education is so huge, and making sure our managers understand this, it is really, really important. One of the things that I've been focusing a lot on, and from a timing perspective, I think it makes sense, is this concept of how COVID plays a role in covering. So the question becomes did COVID-19 provide a situation where there was a forced uncovering for a lot of individuals? I can tell you the number of phone calls that I have been on where a child runs across the screen, or a hand waves in front of it, or they're screaming from the background. A lot of people are unable to continue to cover family status. And I think in a lot of ways, you found out a lot about your employer based off of the grace that they provided in those situations. But with the uncovering that was forced, there's a chance that we have employees who are going to recover when they return to work, unless we're open and honest and provide an environment in which people truly can be their full self. Similarly, last year during I don't want to say the height of Black Lives Matter, because I think it's something that, while the media doesn't focus as much on now, still needs to be something that we as a organization and community continue to focus on, but we saw that same level of need to have these dialogues and to uncover about our support of a community as a result of all the atrocities that were occurring in the Black community. We need leaders and individuals and organizations who are going to advocate for change, both systematically and culturally, and identify inequalities within the organization. We cannot continue with the ostrich effect of sticking our head into the ground and pretending that everything is okay in our organization. We have to recognize that 60% of our team members are refusing to bring their whole self to work. And it could be that you have individuals who just generally are never going to want to share any of the personal aspects of their life. And that's fine, as long as it's a choice and they don't feel as though they're being compelled to hide it because it's going to interfere with their ability to advance in your organization. We also need to develop a workforce strategy that includes a welcoming environment for those individuals with disabilities. And I don't have the solution for that, but guess what? Chris does. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to him to start having our dialogue about that.
Awesome. Thanks, Tawny. And fantastic. I think covering is very overlooked in business, especially when we start talking about people with disabilities, right? People with disabilities are constantly covering, constantly innovating, and businesses, if they don't foster an inclusive culture, a lot of times people with disabilities tend to leave or don't feel comfortable at work and are at major risk. So I'm excited to dive a little deeper into disability, but real quick, just talking about the department I work for. I work for Maine Med, but I work for Maine Medical Center's Department of Vocational Services. And we're kind of like a free, inclusive staffing agency for businesses across Maine. And we focus on helping people with disabilities access gainful and sustainable workforce or jobs within Maine. And we assist a very wide range of individuals. We assist a little over 1,000 individuals a year, and folks ranging from needing a lot of support down to folks needing hardly any, folks that have master's degrees and advanced degrees, and folks that don't have doesn't have a high school diploma or something like that. And there's many ways to get involved deeper than just a placement. Things like informational interviews, mock interviews, job shadows, company tours are super important for a lot of the clients we work with to understand what's the workplace culture. Can I do this task? There's a lot of anxiety with having a disability and getting into the workforce. And we're in partnership. A big grant that we have is in partnership with the Department of Labor's Vocational Rehab, that they send all the referrals to us. So anyone that's deemed job ready from the state level, they come to us, and we kind of build partnerships with different companies out there. But diving into some market statistics on the next slide, just to kind of lay the kind of groundwork and kind of get a lay of the land. According to the CDC, about 1 in 4 people, so 25% of Americans, live with a disability. So knowing somebody with a disability, having a disability yourself, identifying with a disability is very common in America. There are a lot more people than I think people think, equaling out to about the 3rd largest market segment in the US. Talking on an economic level, people with disabilities, according to a study by Accenture, have a discretionary spending power of over $600 billion. Add friends, add caretakers into that, it gets over $3 trillion. So there is a huge market segment with people with disabilities. In Maine specifically, getting a little more specific, there are about 195,000 working aged Mainers. And I always like to talk about this number specifically because Maine operates in such a workforce shortage at the moment, but there is a vast untapped market of dedicated workers that identify with a disability that businesses can tap into. And there could be some modifications, whether it's to align or to your culture or something to make it more inclusive, where you can really tap into this market, which we'll dive into a little bit later. And 66% of this big group of individuals are not employed at all and are eager to get into the workforce. And then on a little bit more of a macro level, this is the largest unemployment rate. So individuals with disabilities make up the largest unemployment rate of any minority group in the country, which is huge because the movement of DEI and the movement of fostering inclusive culture, often people with disabilities are overlooked, but they are a very large, untapped, dedicated group of workers. So we want to jump into a poll really quickly before we back out. This stat always is a very, very interesting one to me. But what percentage of individuals with a disability have an invisible disability? It's I think that the next slide has a really great picture that will show this. But commonly people think of the physical disabilities right off the bat, somebody in a wheelchair or somebody that can't lift or may have one arm or something that's more apparent. But in reality, there are a lot of invisible disabilities as well. All right. So we have about 6 people that have responded. Brooke, if you want to cut it, we can go to the next slide. Awesome. So this next slide, I think, really depicts what we're talking about. Majority said about 80%, which is fantastic. Really close. It's actually 90%. 90% of people with disabilities identify with an invisible disability. However, majority of people immediately think of the 10% visible. I really think this picture identifies kind of the group that we're talking about in light, how there are a lot of identifiable physical disabilities: Down syndrome, amputations, paralysis, cerebral palsy, blind and visually impaired, someone walking with a dog, somebody having a cane or a walking stick or walking with a buddy. However, the majority of disabilities, majority of the clients we work with have an invisible disability: ADHD, anxiety and depression, PTSD, autism, a learning disability. I grew up with a learning disability and actually went through the voc rehab system growing up. And a lot of times it's not the first thing people identify. And when I do uncover that, people are often, you get the look of, oh, I didn't realize that right off the bat. And it's important not to assume that that people don't have a disability around you, because it looks all different ways, right? And that's an important part of what Tawny was talking about, fostering that inclusive culture, making people comfortable with uncovering their disability and having that communication. Because if someone on the leadership level identifies, hey, I have a learning disability, may make somebody else a lot more comfortable to have that dialogue, and the culture will foster organically. Just to kind of give a couple examples on the next slide of the clients we work with. So this is Stanley. He came to us with a job goal of a material handler, a repetitive task, stocking shelves. And he identified with having a developmental disability, had a high school diploma, and his major challenge was navigating the job interview, really uncomfortable sitting in the conventional conversation of a job interview. So we helped him out. Our employment specialists, who are kind of like our case managers, they worked with Stanley on interview prep and actually attended the job interview. And we provided job coaching for Stanley because he needed a little bit more support. So that's an individual that goes in to support our clients in the workplace if needed as a reasonable accommodation. And as a result of working with us and having an open employer who was very inclusive and welcoming Stanley into their culture, he was hired by a local retailer. And his quote always makes me smile. He goes, "It rocks. I get to organize all cool items." And he actually just got promoted to working more hours. He is working with our benefits team, but his goal is to get off of his Social Security benefits and work more and start to take a more leadership role. But his top thing was he felt comfortable because his employer didn't identify him or silo him just because he had a disability. And then moving on to Henry. Henry was looking for IT and data management, had a more invisible disability. He was on the autism spectrum, and he actually had a bachelor's degree in economics and political science. And he also had trouble navigating the job interview with the social skills. We worked with him on interview prep as well, and we attended his job interview, and he actually got a full-time analyst job working at a national loan company. And once again, talking with Henry, he's really comfortable because his boss has helped him with his social anxiety feel more a part of the culture. His boss meets with him 5 minutes before every shift just to make sure he's comfortable because he has anxiety before starting a shift, and making sure that he has a voice at the table and he's not kind of looked at as, oh, he's the individual. We helped him out to get a job. It's more of, hey, Henry, what do you got to bring to the table? Because his job is really crucial to the team's success. And he no longer needs job coaching. We've identified natural supports there, and it's really worked out. And he doesn't feel like he needs to cover. He can feel really comfortable talking about what he's interested in. He's made a couple friends at work as well. So moving on to just kind of, I think Tawny's going to jump back in here just to kind of talk about what does covering look like on a more macro level.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I mean, thank you for all of those examples. So what does covering with a disability look like? Sorry, hold on. Okay. Let's talk about individuals who've covered generally. Helen Keller, we talked about her a little bit already, but an individual who insisted on being photographed from angles that hid her protruding eye. What would that look like to an individual who may be working with Chris or who hasn't come to work with Chris? Imagine doing an interview and not revealing to the individual who you're interviewing with that you have a visual impairment. Are you fumbling into the room? Are you not making eye contact with the individual? Those would all be taken by an employer as being concerning. And I've seen multiple notations where someone says, oh, the individual didn't make eye contact. They didn't seem to, be connecting with me in the format in which I'm looking for, because they were covering the fact that they had this visual impairment. Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the fact that he hid hid as disability. Let's use a different type of disability. Let's talk about a hearing impairment. So think about, as a culture, who we are. As a culture, we have gone over the last however many decades to make smaller and smaller and now almost invisible hearing aids, right? Why is having a hearing aid looked at as something that needs to be covered or hidden, right? If it is purely from a, I don't want to say a vanity perspective, but from the visual of the individual, fine. But if it's because you don't want people to know that you have this hearing impairment, that's a form of covering. And should an individual choose to take their hearing aid out prior to an interview or prior to a meeting, that covering is going to interfere with their ability, most likely, to engage with the individuals who are performing the interview. Let's talk about some of the disabilities that we see that are most often covered. Anxiety and depression. I mean, this is something that people just suffer through and they don't have a dialogue, whether it's with human resources, a manager, when they walk away from a situation and know that they were awkward or that they were struggling with whatever the experience was, instead of verbalizing and helping employers to understand ways in which we could limit that fear or anxiety that sometimes may lead to panic. Instead, we just kind of don't talk about it because for some reason this anxiety or depression is seen as something that is a trait in which will interfere with the ability to do any and all jobs. Alcoholism. It's something that is not discussed, and we have a lot of individuals who simply will not go to company events or social gatherings in which alcohol could be available for fear that only alcohol will be available, or that their peers or coworkers or managers are going to force some form of alcohol to them, or otherwise they're going to have to make some excuse. Oh, I'm on a diet. I mean, you hear that a lot. Oh, I'm limiting my calorie intake, so I'm not drinking this week. Or, oh, I have to drive home. Whatever excuse an individual feels as though they need to be made, very rarely do you have someone who says, no, I'm an alcoholic and I won't be drinking. Vision and hearing impairment, we talked about that a little bit already, but these are ones that we see covered on a daily basis. You have team members who are covering this. In the legal profession, 1 in 10 attorney is an alcoholic. So when we look at our peers in my industry, the fact that we don't talk about alcoholism and other forms of addiction more, to me is really scary. But I want to turn it back over to Chris, because we're not just here to identify issues, but Chris is here to help talk about some solutions.
Awesome. Thanks, Tawny. And I think the next part we're going to jump into is a little bit more of the business case, right? So we're talking about identifying areas to help people uncover. We're identifying how to foster an inclusive culture, and companies can be really interested in that. But there's also the business case, especially with regards to inclusive hiring for people with disabilities, and how it's not just a charity handout. Oh, I can help this person maybe get a job, and it's something nice to do. It actually has a lot of financial benefits as well. First being improved shareholder value. Studies have shown that hiring people with disabilities can have a direct correlation on companies' ROI, especially with the movement now to increase of consumer spending toward more purpose-driven organizations, a push toward conscious capitalism, and a lot more push on kind of millennial spending habits. This can really start to boost your shareholder value and increase your company's revenues as a whole. And also people with disabilities tend to show up a lot. So investing a lot in somebody with a disability can help on the backside of lowering turnover, which I'll get to in a second. Also, regulators and investors are getting more conscious themselves, focusing more on ESG investing and impact investing, having an inclusive workforce strategy and fostering a workforce culture can be a big identity part of your company, which can access to different impact investment channels as well. Going to cost reduction. It's a study done by an institute at UNH showed that turnover for people with disabilities is actually 20 to 30% lower. So with turnover, especially with small businesses in Maine being such a problematic kind of cost, by lowering that turnover and then boosting the revenue based on what I talked about previously with the discretionary spending power of people with disabilities being in the billions, over $600 billion, you can really boost your profit margins a little bit, lower your costs, and it can be really great for business on a financial side. It can also improve market share. There was a national study done about 87% of customers report their preference in being a patron to companies that employ people with disabilities, right? So you're getting a lot more people in the door to spend money at your local organization, as well as employing individuals and giving individuals a shot to get into the market. And it can also create a little bit of a competitive advantage as well, especially in a saturated market. Having a diverse workforce with the push, like I mentioned, to purpose-driven spending can unlock a lot more patrons to your company, especially if it's in a competitive market. Just to reiterate, if you factor in caretakers, friends, family, studies show that that's a discretionary spending power of over $3 trillion, which is great revenue to tap into as well. But a lot of this comes into actually fostering that culture and making sure it is a great place to work for individuals with disabilities. There also are some tax credits and compliance. There's a work opportunities tax credit that companies can get into. And then if you're a federal contractor, you're supposed to, I think, have about 7% of your workforce that identifies with a disability to fall under federal compliance. So working with us can help that. And then going beyond financial benefits, people with disabilities have been innovating their whole life. They grow up in a culture, in a system that's not built for them, right? Whether it's through housing, healthcare, employment, pretty much school, education, pretty much every system, they've had to innovate in some way, depending on their disability. So that can be brought into the workplace, an increase in innovation, an increase in creative thinking and thinking outside of the box. Since people with disabilities have to do that every day, it can be brought in and fostered within the work culture. And then improvement in productivity by fostering an inclusive culture, you can lower the turnover, right? I'm sure Tawny's seen these stats, but not fostering culture or not fostering uncovering probably leads to higher turnover, and especially with people with disabilities. If an individual with a disability doesn't feel comfortable, the odds of leaving that job is higher. So making an inclusive culture can just improve productivity, and with that lower turnover statistic, just improve productivity. Also enhance your reputation, right? People see you're helping the community in different ways. Having an inclusive workforce tends to improve your and enhance your reputation. So when customers see your product out in the market, they can see that as an opportunity to purchase and connect with their company. But talking on these macro statistics, diving into a little bit of what companies can do. I think a top one is get leadership buy-in. Tawny talked about that a lot with covering, but really getting leadership buy-in and having a strategy from the top down and including disability within your DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. There was a study that went out that of the 200 companies surveyed, only 4% of those companies actually included disability within their DEI strategy. So there's a huge miss, I think, on the DEI movement and excluding people with disabilities, even though disability does connect with all the other groups that fit into a lot of the DEI initiatives. I also think educating your employees. So after you get the leadership buy-in, make sure it trickles down to your management and even on a more localized level, coworkers. So everybody within the culture understands the value of hiring people with disabilities and why the organization is committed to this. Be open to having trainings on disability etiquette, disability inclusion in the workforce, fostering an inclusive culture for people with disabilities, as well as create ERGs. So a lot of companies have employee resource groups, but create one specifically for disability. Have allow for individuals that may be covering an invisible disability or not comfortable talking about their disability to come together to have a conversation, and people without disabilities to come and learn and help that identification move a little further. One of my best friends, Vince, he has pretty severe cerebral palsy, and he's starting a job down in Massachusetts at MITRE. He's a mechanical engineer. He's going to aerospace engineering. Brilliant guy, but he picked MITRE because they had an ERG specifically around people with disabilities and wanted to foster inclusive culture for people with disabilities. So it can really help with identifying really strong talent to come, because he had a lot of competing offers, but he ultimately picked it because of their ERG options, as well as have an open dialogue. Be comfortable talking about, in October, it's Disability Inclusive Hiring kind of month. I think it's Disability Employment Awareness Month. Do something in October. Don't be afraid to kind of have that open dialogue and learn from people that may identify with a disability, as well as making sure you're having that open dialogue with your employees. And then just some practical suggestions. I think there's really 3 areas where companies, if you want to hit the ground running with this, can kind of jump right in. First being recruiting. It can be a little daunting on, hey, I want to hire people with disabilities, don't really know how I should make accommodations in the workplace. Feel free to reach out to your local community partners, our departments of community partners throughout the state. Look at the job centers, schools, feel comfortable partnering and reaching out and learning from those organizations and building the pipelines and the partnerships to effectively recruit people with disabilities. Also consider customized work experiences. We're actually seeing this a lot now, especially in the manufacturing space, where manufacturers were really set on the 12-hour shifts or the one person for however long the line is working. But with the workforce shortage due to COVID, we're actually seeing companies break up their shifts, and we've been able to work with specifically manufacturers on breaking a 12-hour shift up into 4 3-hour shifts, and where an employee or a client of ours didn't identify with fitting the mold previous to COVID or previous to this customization, now can come in for 4 hours and help make the line run more efficient. So consider customizing, consider breaking up full-time jobs into part-time jobs, and then working with the individual on skills and abilities to fill your workforce need. Also, for job postings, adding a line about encouraging people with disabilities to apply. I know Vince at MITRE really identified with that when he was applying, because it called out specifically people with disabilities, and he felt instantly comfortable from a job posting perspective, so he could be his full self when he came to the interview. And then be aware of potential biases. We've actually seen this a little bit, which was a little surprising, but a lot of times people will try out hiring an individual with disability and it doesn't work out, and they close the door completely. For example, we had somebody say, I hired somebody with a disability before and it didn't work out, or we already have somebody with a disability. And in reality, if you think about 1 in 4 people in America have or identify with a disability, there's a lot of people probably in that work culture that don't either feel comfortable identifying that they have a disability, or are getting the door closed on them because the company sees, oh, this may not have worked out with one person, but everyone's different. Just like if you'd hired somebody that didn't come through necessarily a disability inclusive program like ourselves. And then for the application and interview process, I think a really great example right off the bat is Microsoft identified that they were having trouble hiring coders and people to really dive into their software, and wanted to foster a much more inclusive kind of recruitment and interview strategy. And people with autism and other social disorders and disabilities tend to be really great with technology. However, they have trouble identifying, or they have trouble navigating the interview process, just like our example of Henry earlier. So what Microsoft did, rather than just the typical hour-long kind of hammer away the who are you, tell us about yourself, they made a week-long kind of coding boot camp type interview, to where the individuals could come in, show their skills, and let the work talk for them, rather than just trying to fit a social system that their disability kind of inhibits them to be successful in. And they've seen great success with this, and they've actually pivoted a lot of their interview to be more of a working interview to foster more inclusion, as well as work with people like ourselves. We have be open to having an employment specialist come in or a job coach come in and help an individual with a disability navigate the application or the interview process. And also be flexible in reviewing applicants' work histories, of kind of avoid assuming that gaps are something bad. I think a lot of times on resumes, people see gaps as problematic, right? There's no timeline that says from January to January I worked here, and then January to the next year I worked here. If there's a big gap, it's common with people with disabilities, especially if they didn't feel comfortable in the workforce or workplace culture that they previously were in. A lot of times people just get up and leave, and then don't mind that kind of gap on a resume. So be open to kind of identifying what the gap is. And then lastly, on the onboarding process, be open to job coaching coming in right off the bat, and supporting the client. A lot of times our clients need a job coach maybe for the first couple of days. Not all the clients we work with do need job coaching, but it's kind of that anxiety alleviation to learn different aspects of the job, and then we kind of taper off as the clients get more comfortable. Also, consider reasonable accommodations when an individual is hired, whether an alternative schedule if the individual can't drive or doesn't drive, making a schedule around the bus schedule, or remote work, or allowing a cell phone for an anxiety alleviating text, or for task prompts. Be open to assistive technology. The awesome thing about accommodations is employers often think that they're really expensive, but the majority are free, and also as much as maybe $500. They're really inexpensive, and there are a lot of state programs that can help buy reasonable accommodations for individuals that may need, especially assistive technology. And then continuing on this fostering an inclusive culture, identify natural supports and peer mentoring opportunities. Maybe you buddy them up for the first month just to make sure everyone's feeling comfortable with getting to know the whole office. And then also provide, this is a big one, provide opportunities for growth. We're seeing companies sometimes siloing individuals with disabilities. For example, we're working with one grocery store. For when we went in there, really identified the clients we worked with as just baggers or just cart attendants. But through training, through conversations, through leadership buy-in, we're really able to help that grocery chain give people with disabilities an opportunity outside of just bagging and carts, and see the opportunity to grow, which has been great success. And then this last part, just a quick employer example. We tried to get Andy to come in, but we work pretty closely with Wilbur's Chocolates, who is a family-owned business. And previous to working with us, Andy had some production inefficiencies and really needed to fill his production jobs. And he connected with someone at CEI that eventually put Andy in contact with us, and we were able to work with Andy to identify jobs on his production line that some of our clients could fill. He broke up his jobs from full-time down to part-time. He's fostered a workplace culture to where the first client went in, felt so comfortable, we were able to place a couple more clients there, and they're doing fantastic. This is our client Ariana with Andy, and she loves her job. She works 2 days a week for a few hours a day bagging candy, and we asked her what her favorite part is, and she was just happy to be a part of the team as well as given the opportunity. And she loves working there with her favorite candy, which is I think chocolate covered lobsters, she said. So with Andy being open to working with us and kind of coming in with, hey, I have this production need, but I don't really know how to fill it. I really want to foster an inclusive culture. We were able to work with him to best identify areas for our clients to succeed and ultimately bring him value, because he now has his production line up and running efficiently. So he's been a fantastic partner, and he's really fostered a great workforce culture up at Wilbur's. And then last, just some quick resources to go over. Our website has a whole lot of kind of information and areas to dive deeper on what I talked about today. And then Jan, for any employers that may be approached with an accommodation question or kind of overwhelmed by what is a reasonable accommodation, Jan, the Job Accommodation Network, askjan.org, is a fantastic resource. We're constantly going on there when we get questions from employers. So definitely recommend that. And then Tawny, if you want to go over your resources quick, and then we'll wrap up with some questions and we can bring Catherine back on. So thank you.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And I also highly recommend the Jan's site for the Job Accommodations Network. It's a site that I also use when I'm working with employers who have received an accommodation request or who have learned of a disability and generally are trying to make accommodations to the job duties and responsibilities. Throughout the course of the presentation, I referenced a lot of statistics. Most of those statistics can be found in the Deloitte study that's available through the link that's provided. You will get a copy of these slides, so don't worry about that, but this would be the best place for you to go to get that Deloitte study concerning covering in the workplace. And then another really big resource that I use a lot is a book called The Hidden Assault on Our Civil Rights. And that is by Kenji Yoshino. It's called Covering: The Hidden Assault on Our Civil Rights. And the cool news is if you don't already have that book, we're doing a giveaway. So how you can enter, we're giving away 3 copies of this book, Covering. You can enter by signing up for Verrill's blog, Taking Care of HR Business, where we talk about new things that are happening in the HR space. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter at HR_Alvarez. And if you do that, 3 people will be randomly chosen to receive Covering, and a member of the Verrill team will reach out and ask for your mailing address, and we'll get you a copy of the book. So, thank you so much for attending. And this is the portion where we're going to move to Q&A.
Thank you, guys. That was really, really a great presentation. We appreciate it very much. And if you all want to come on with video, we can see you, or you can not. It's up to you. So didn't know if we could open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions for Tawny or Chris.
I actually have a question for Chris. So Chris, when an individual has said to you, we've hired someone with a disability before and it didn't work out, we know we're seeing a form of implicit bias that's being explicitly verbalized. How do you respond in those situations to help people move past that bias that's already been created, which is oftentimes really hard to break through?
That's a fantastic question. And I actually see those questions as such an opportunity for engagement, because then the company we talked to took the time to say that. And a lot of times it is an implicit bias, but it's just the scene of they're unaware of the necessary size and what disability actually is, right? We're actually seeing it now with a farm we're working with, who he's worked with a certain type of individuals that identify with disabilities having significant barriers. And he thought, when we come in, that's who we're bringing him. Somebody that needs a lot of support, can work 2 hours and needs repetitive tasks, right? And those are some of our clients. But we actually helped him fill a truck driver job. And it was through a conversation about the wide variety of what disability actually is, and talking about how majority, 90% of individuals identify with having an invisible disability, and also having a conversation, I think, with employers to help them understand that disability means so much. There's such a wide variety and wide array of the clients we work with and individuals out there that identify with the disability. So a lot of times it comes with talking about the same thing could happen if you hired somebody off the street, right? Turnover happens and sometimes it doesn't work out, but working with our department, we definitely pride ourselves on knowing our clients kind of inside and out, and we want to foster high quality matches. We do have a lot of clients that come through our doors looking for work, but we like to take our time to really get to know the individual and match skills up to ultimately, percentage wise, probably have a higher percentage of success in the workplace. So yeah. It's definitely an interesting conversation when it arises. It's usually met with a longer dialogue and it takes a few months, but it's also fantastic on the flip side when companies that were closed-minded and kind of didn't understand it right off the bat flip the switch, and actually a lot of them have turned into some of our champions. So yeah.
That's a good segue. I had a question for you. What's been your biggest challenge or reward with working with people with disabilities with COVID, and one side with them and one side with the businesses?
Sure. So like we probably all faced COVID, we went dark pretty quickly. I think last March or 2 Marches ago, we went from meeting clients in the office. We were really kind of ramping up. York County's been interesting specifically. We never, previous to about 1.5 years ago, we never had services offered in York County. So we started services in about January, right before the pandemic, and we were just ramping up and everything went dark. So we saw a big pivot of our clients going on hold, especially with people with disabilities. Nobody really knew if hospitals were going to fill up, if all the externalities of the virus. It was talked a lot about people with disabilities were going to be last to come through for medical care, and it was really difficult to navigate keeping our clients engaged. On the flip side, when things started to open and businesses started to be more resilient, we actually saw a spike in placements because businesses were having to innovate, businesses were losing their workforce, businesses were maybe not as open to customized employment, but then we're seeing how little of a workforce they had. We actually were able to place people at a remarkable rate because of our employment specialists working so closely with our clients. They talked about the risks of going out in the community during COVID, but a lot of our clients were really still excited to work and understood the risks. And we worked with different group homes to make sure we're not exposing anyone else that lives in those group homes if their client goes out to work and things like that. So it was definitely a challenge, but on the flip side, it led to a lot of placements. I think a lot of our staff and a lot of our department were kind of weary on where we would end up. We had one person from a recruitment agency almost apologize that we work with people with disabilities in this time because of the high unemployment numbers. And then when everything starts to open up, people with disabilities may not have the opportunities when people get back into the workforce. But we're actually seeing such a flip. Companies are calling us now to recruit people. The people we work with are just super excited and jazzed to have the opportunity. So it's turned into a challenge at the beginning, but it's actually had a really great outcome for a lot of our clients. So yeah. Tawny, I actually have a question for you. In covering and in the Deloitte study or any other studies, I imagine turnover, if a company doesn't foster an inclusive culture, I imagine turnover can spike. Are there any statistics that you've come across specifically around turnover with not fostering an inclusive culture, not like leadership, not opening up for uncovering and things like that?
Not specifically, and I think in a lot of ways it's because the data is so difficult to identify, because we have individuals who leave an organization and in most cases they say because they had a better opportunity. Now when we dig down as to why it was a better opportunity, we're then there's multiple layers to why someone leaves an organization, and you have so many organizations that respond to that question with it's not us, it's them. That doesn't work. I mean, that's not true. If you were the best place to work, if you were inclusive, if you kind of all of those different aspects of being an amazing employer, your turnover would not be similar to your peers. You would only be losing people, and I don't want to say only because of death and a potential move, out of the region, but it would be a much more limited reason why you are losing your workforce. Lack of ability to grow within a position, all of those kind of play into the idea of inclusion, but also to the idea of covering and whether or not people are able to be their authentic self. And we've seen it, interestingly enough, in non-protected classes, this idea of our culture is such that you hide your tattoos, and we won't allow tattoos or piercings. And I think there's a lot of people who feel very strongly that if you're not going to allow me to be my whole self, to show the art that's on my body, you're not the right place for me. But it's interesting because we don't say those same things about our depression or about our anxiety or anything like that. When we say, hey, if I can't be honest with you about the days in which I'm struggling to get through a task or struggling to get into work, it becomes much more difficult, because you have people who leave your organization who have a disability, who you never even knew. It's interesting because for those who are in the HR realm all the time, they'll recall approximately 4 years ago now, when we had the Google incident, in which we had an employee of Google who put out a large kind of long diatribe in which he noted Google says that it is inclusive and diverse, but that's a crock. We are diverse in thinking of people who have liberal and democratic or left-wing type thought, but there's no diversity of thought in this organization. And we talk about diversity, but we're only talking about diversity of individuals who are male and of Asian descent, but we don't talk about diversity of disability, and we don't talk about diversity in all these other senses. And it's interesting because he was terminated. He was terminated based off of the publication itself. He ended up suing Google, and the case went away. But when we think about what diversity is, I think that we as a country and a culture have done such a bad job at some fundamental aspects of diversity, and that would include disability, it includes age, it includes so many different aspects. While most people think of diversity and inclusion as being only race, gender, and national origin, when diversity of thought becomes a big part of it as well. Socioeconomic condition, places in which organizations will only hire people who have graduated from Columbia or Harvard or those type of places, that decreases the diversity. And there's actually some really interesting studies that occurred with JP Morgan regarding their turnover rate, and they realized they had a much lower turnover rate when they stopped hiring from Ivy League schools. And that was based off of a bias that they thought only the best were coming from Ivy League schools, without recognizing that you had a lot of people who were the best in their field who didn't have an Ivy League education, and who actually would stay at the organization for a much longer period of time. So great question. Thanks, Chris.
I think you bring up a really good point too, especially with the mental health conversation and anxiety, depression, and different mental health conditions that arise. We also have a department closer to the hospital, but we have appointment specialists embedded in outpatient psychiatry settings. And it's a big conversation, the disclosure conversation, especially around mental health, and people feeling comfortable, but also uncomfortable. Majority feel uncomfortable identifying where they're at from a mental health standpoint because of just, I think, the overall culture of the stigma around mental health from not just a company perspective, but just the whole country, and how kind of everybody sees mental health, which is really unfortunate. So a lot of times we work behind the scenes, but that's where we're pushing employers to create these ERG groups or create some sort of a way to foster an inclusive culture to where somebody doesn't have to feel uncomfortable identifying that they're suffering with anxiety and depression or something that's more invisible. So I'm happy you brought that up.
Okay, so do we have any other thoughts or questions from anyone? We can come off mute or raise your hand or have a conversation. Okay, we always put our survey that we have here, Brooke's going to put that in our chat feature, so we'd really appreciate your thoughts on this program and any other programs. We'll leave it open for a little bit if you can take a moment and let us know what you think. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Key Bank, Maine HR Convention, and Maine Biz. And thank you to Tawny and Chris, our fabulous speakers. A round of applause. That was really great. Oh, and we have a new little one who's joined us. That's awesome. Aren't you cute? I love it when that happens. So nice to see the little one. And we hope to see you all on Thursday, July 21st for our Hit Me With Your Best Shot. We can get all the answers about vaccinations and what's going on. And we have Brooke there, so hi. And thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. Brooke will be following up. We have a ton of resources that Chris gave us with a big list of things. So we'll be sending that, and Tawny will be giving away her book. So I see we have a nice chat from Lindsay. Thanks, Lindsay. Good to hear you or see you in the chat. So have a great day, everybody, and thank you so much. We'll leave it open for a few minutes for the survey, and enjoy the sunshine. It's going to be a nice day today. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.